Hey guys, welcome back. Not too long ago I put my summer tires on and took the winter tires off, and I wanted to make a video to show you how to do that because it's super easy and saves you a lot of money, but I didn't. The good news is that as soon as I swapped my tires out, the squealer started screeching on my brakes. My brakes need to be changed, so I'm back here to put to change the brake pads in the front of my car. You'll see in a second what that sounds like. And we're gonna go through the steps and also show you how to change your tires when you need to do that. So let's do it.
So safety first, you're gonna pop something behind one of the wheels so the car can't roll back off the jack, and then you're gonna set the jack. Now there's only a few specific spots where the jack can go without damaging anything, so check the manual, take a look under the car, because you don't wanna start cranking it up and have the weight of the car come down and dent or damage something. Once the jack is set, you're gonna take a ratchet or something and just crack loose all of the lug nuts. Now you have to do this with the wheel still on the ground because they're pretty tight on there, and you don't want the wheel in the air or else it's just gonna spin and you're not gonna get them loose. Once you do get them all broken loose, you can then start jacking the car up. Now if you're not sure how high you need to get the car, all you need to do is enough clearance to get the wheel off. So periodically shake the wheel, and you can see here when I shake the wheel that it spins free, and that means I'm good to go. So now you can take something and start spinning the lug nuts off. When you're spinning the lug nuts off, you're going to take them and put them somewhere so you don't lose them. I like to put them on my jack stand, because if you lose them in the pine needles or wherever, then you can't put the wheel back on and then you're stuck where you are. Now the wheel's off, we take a tire and just slide it under the front bumper here. That's in case the jack fails so the car doesn't smash into the ground, and then you're going to go under the hood and release the cap off the brake fluid container just to release that pressure.
Well, now that we got the wheel off, we can take a look at the brakes. That's the first step if you're changing your tires. You can skip ahead to when we put the wheel back on, in which case when you're changing your tires, you just take the other seasoned tires and put them on, tighten everything back up. But we're gonna look at the brakes now. It feels like the rotors might also be messed up, and we might have to get some rotors to replace too. But let's take a look and see. Here are brakes. Here's your rotor, it has double-sided, and here's the caliper, which holds the brake pads. There's one on each side. So when you hit your brake pedal, this squeezes together against the brake pad, and that's what stops the wheel. The back feels pretty messed up, to be honest, so we're definitely gonna have to replace those. So we gotta take this off and get the pads off and the rotor off so we can replace them. The caliper here is attached with a bolt here and one at the bottom in here, and those are usually pretty tight on there. We're gonna break them loose, get everything off, and take a look at it and see what we're in for. You gotta be careful when you take these off that you don't let it drop, because it's just gonna be hanging on by this wire or this cable that holds the fluid, so you can't let it drop or you'll damage that.
So once you get those bolts broken loose, you're gonna hang onto the caliper housing with one hand and take those bolts out with the other. You're gonna put the bolts safely with your lug nuts so you don't lose them, and then once you get the caliper housing off, you can take the rotor off and then flip the caliper housing upside down and let it sit on top of the hub.
And these brake pads are super worn down and messed up. We'll take a look at the new ones and see the difference here.
Here we can see the massive difference between the new one and the old one. And that scratching noise is no good. That means that the old rotor is messed up. Here's a look at the new one. Such a huge difference. So before we put them on, we're gonna get some brake parts cleaner and spray down the rotors because they have an oil on them, and that oil will prevent improper braking. So you gotta get that stuff cleaned off. So just spray a little bit on and get a rag and wipe it off and do the other side just to make sure. Better safe than sorry. Safety first. So now it's time to reassemble the brake system. The first thing we're going to do is put these clips on that come with the brakes. When you take the pads off, you're going to see the old clips, so you should take them off, and don't be too concerned about knowing where they fit in. It's pretty obvious they only fit in one way. You just got to make sure that you clip them in as tight as you can, because the brake pads do have to sit in there. And once you finally get those squeezed in nice and tight, you're going to take a little bit of anti-seize and just rub it very carefully on the edge of the caliper cylinder and on the back of the brake pads or on the horns where the brake pads are going to sit. And this is just to prevent them from seizing on there, so we can get them off easier next time we have to change the brakes. So now, this is the reason that we took the cap off the brake fluid container under the hood, because we have to compress the calipers to give as much room and clearance as possible, so when the new thicker brake pads are on, they'll be able to fit over the rotor properly. So you saw the massive difference between the new brake pads and the old brake pads. So every time you hit the brake pedal, that fluid is squeezing that caliper shut, and that's what causes the brakes to work. So when the brake pads get thinner and thinner, that caliper is going to remain tighter and tighter. And once you get those squeezed all the way back, you can put the brake pads in those clips that we just put on, and make sure you get them as tight back as you can, once again, to get a maximum amount of clearance for the rotor. Now that you've got that all assembled and it fits, you're gonna probably get somebody to help you hold the rotor tight, get the caliper housing back on with the brake pads, and then just put those 2 bolts in just to get it to sit there so it doesn't fall. And it's a little bit tricky to get them lined up, but once you do, you're golden. You can finger tighten them and then get your ratchet on there. Get them as tight as you can get them, because you do not want this to fall off. And once you crank those pretty tight, check them again and make sure they are super tight on there, because like I said, you don't want these coming off. And then you're good to put the wheel back on.
Now that the brakes are changed, it's time to put the wheel back on. This is where you should have jumped to if you weren't interested in the brake change. That was fairly painless. Let's do it.
So whether you've changed your brakes or not, this part of the process is the same. We're going to reassemble the wheel, get it back on there. It can be a little bit tricky to line up on the pins that the lug nuts bolt onto. But once you get it on there, just take your lug nuts and spin them on finger tight, just to make sure that the wheel can stay there and you can move on to the next step, which is going to be getting them tight with a 4-way or a ratchet or something. Now, you're going to see the pattern that I'm doing. I was taught this from everybody that works on cars that I know. When you're putting these on, you're going to go in an opposite pattern, not in a circle. And this is to ensure that the wheel gets tightened equally and flat across the whole system, so that it goes on like flat. Because if you do it the other way, there's a chance that your wheel will not go on flat and it'll be on crooked, and that's no good. It's dangerous and it's unsafe. So just make sure you get them on, and you're not cranking them tight here. You're just getting them as tight as you can go, easy enough, just to make sure, like, once again, that the back of the wheel is flat onto the rotor across all 5 lug nuts. Once you get those on that like semi-tight, and you know that you're happy with it, you can then take the jack down. And once the jack is down, you can get your ratchet again, and this is where you're gonna crank on them and get them super tight. You don't want to get them too tight. If you get them too tight, you're gonna stretch the pins out, weaken them, and then there's a chance they could break. So you should be able to hear them just creak a little bit, and that should be tight enough. But when you're doing this, you're gonna follow that same pattern of opposites until you get them all done. And once you do get them all done, just go around and check them all to make sure. When you're checking them, you can do it any way you want. This is just to make sure you didn't miss any and that they're all nice and tight.
That's one side done. Now just rinse and repeat on the other side and we're good to go home. But I mean, maybe we'll test the brakes first and make sure they work.
So this was supposed to be a nice, easy montage just to show you the whole process start to finish without me interrupting to explain things. But as it always goes when you're working on cars, we ran into a few problems that weren't present on the other side. First, the brake pads were basically seized in there. I'm assuming nobody put anti-seize on it the last time we changed them. And then when we put the clips in for the new brake pads, one of them must have been bent because we could not get the brake pad in. It took quite a bit of figuring until I eventually just got a screwdriver and bent it back while I was trying to squeeze the brake pad in, but that did take a bit of time. Anyways, there's nothing to worry about. Problems like this always come up when you're working on cars. It's just something that happens. But other than those two issues, this was pretty smooth. So if you want to watch, this is the whole process start to finish, wheel to wheel. Enjoy. don't forget to put back on your brake fluid cap nice and tight.
Well, I'm glad we got that done. I'm filthy, but if you found that interesting or educational or at all helpful, please hit the like, hit the subscribe button, and leave me a comment. I forgot how much I like climbing inside of cars. It was a good time. Now the only thing left to do is make sure the brakes work.